Hello, namaste, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I come to you from London. I am Deepak Parmanand. I'm a product lead at Hitachi. So as you can see on the title, I am a product manager, and I'm very excited to be hosting today because I am also an interested party in learning from Seth today. Because as you know, engineering is the second wheel or the other side of the coin that makes all the magic happen. And some might even argue it's the more important side of the coin. So I have Seth Falcon today joining us all the way from Paris. Bonsoir, Seth.
Bonsoir.
Bonsoir. So to kick things off, please introduce yourself to us. And as you do that, what's interesting to me was your previous background at a chef, and you were in America. You moved over to Paris. So as you give an introduction, just talk us a little bit through about your transition, so that it gives the attendees an idea about the questions they might ask you.
Sure, sounds good. Thanks, Deepak, and thanks, Mustafa and Plato, for hosting the event, and thanks everyone for attending. So I'm Seth Falcon. Prior to BlaBlaCar and Paris, I spent the past almost 9 years at a company called Chef Software, and I was based in Seattle, Washington, in the US. And my journey there, I started when the company was quite small, let's say about 20 people, and I was an individual contributor on the team. And over the course of those years, I grew into a tech lead and then an engineering manager. I had an opportunity to work on a new product initiative and grow a team. And through that, grew the team to about 16 and grew a couple of engineering managers. And after doing that for a while, was asked to step up and take the VP Eng role there, which I did for a few years. After that journey, growing the company and my role, and really, I suppose, for some personal reasons, my wife was a French teacher. We had always had a dream to live in France for a while. And so when I was ready to get some new perspective and be someplace else, I looked at what was possible in France, and found a great match connecting with Olivier Bonnet, the current CTO at BlaBlaCar, and that brought me here to Paris. It's been quite a year to live in a different country, given all of the things that have been going on in the world, and a really great adventure. So there's a little bit of introduction.
Excellent, Seth. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's very, very interesting because you've done the engineering route in America. You've done the established big company, the small product group, and then went on to grow into that role. And now you're part of an established firm. So to start things off, let me ask you this very interesting question. So the way I see it, how the relationship between product management and engineering is like the between couples. It's like a marriage. It could be antagonistic, it could be happy, it could be sad. What's your take on that, and how do you view that relationship? Is that a right metaphor? Is there a different metaphor you like to apply to it?
I guess I really see that relationship is one that is needs to be really close kind of collaboration, and tends to be different and closer and a more unique kind of relationship in the team compared to other functions, right? It's really clear that you need both someone like you looking after the product as a whole and the user needs, but you also need to tie that to what's feasible and tie that to the technology, and those things really have to work together. So yeah, I mean, I get the metaphor, and I guess when I think about some of my relationships with product leaders, I mean, there's maybe some of that element of we tend to work closely together a lot, so we tend to get to know each other, and we have both times where things are going really smoothly and times when there's more tension, and yeah.
So the discussion is off to a good start, folks. Product and engineering agree on something, which is great. We'll see how the rest of the talk goes. So I see only one question here. I'll just wait for a few more questions to come through, and then maybe we'll continue. So as you went through the journey of building products, as you said in Chef and now here, are there any point of contrast you'd like to bring about for us today? Domains or geographies, the talent pool available. Pick any of those things and talk us through
Sure.
what you felt about the American view and what you see in Europe.
Sure, I can give a little bit of contrast. I mean, maybe I'll start just, my experience. So Chef is an enterprise, or was, got acquired anyway. The Chef game was selling enterprise software to large firms to help them automate their infrastructure. And BlaBlaCar is a mobility platform, B2C, helping people get from A to B through long distance carpooling as well as buses, and we also do some short distance carpooling as well. So the domains really could not be more different. And that was part of what I was looking for, was something really to learn something quite new. And so, that definitely came with its ups and downs. I think there was a moment early on when I was trying to learn about the organization at BlaBlaCar, and I was asking about the sales team. And in this sort of B2C setup, there's not a sales team. Right, this is totally different. And the terminology around the business and the metrics used are quite different, right? In enterprise sales, it's all about like subscription and ARR, and with the mobility platform, you talk about GMV, gross market value. Okay, so like those things were different and lots of learning. Now on the building software and working with the product team, like those things really kind of familiar and kind of the same. It's maybe surprising, maybe not, but really the fundamentals of building software with people within a team. You face the same kinds of challenges. I mean, you have scope and time and cost, and you have quality, and you have technical migrations to deal with, roadmap pressures, the similar kinds of challenges of connecting engineers to the business purpose, and vice versa, right? Both having your engineers understand the why of what they're building, but also helping other parts of the organization understand, like, what the heck do the engineers do, right? So that's the sort of domains. I'll just one short story maybe on the differences in continent and culture. In a lot of ways, I don't know if surprise is the right word, but I felt at home quite quickly. And in a lot of ways, at least at a company like BlaBlaCar, the environment feels largely familiar to what I was used to in Seattle in terms of tech company and culture and the kinds of conversation and people and engineers and product managers and all of this. One thing that has been difficult to adjust to, Deepak, you're smiling because I was telling you at the beginning of this story before we went live. So how information, especially in presentations and meetings, is presented, there are some cultural differences. So in America, what I'm used to is if there's a meeting about a decision, you share the decision straight away, and then you go into some context and some details about why that's the right decision. And in France, it seems it's rather important that you do that in the opposite order. And so rather you share the context, and then you share the option 1 that you considered, and then you go into detail about the option 2 that you considered, and only at the end coming to the conclusion. And so there was like a couple of first meetings, one in particular where like we had a conversation, a subset of who was in the meeting about a thing I had understood that we had decided. And then we get in this meeting with some of the senior leadership, and all of a sudden, like, this presentation is happening, and we're like back at the beginning, and we're considering option 1 and 2. And I'm kind of going crazy. I'm like, what is it here? Like, did we not decide this already? But it just was the style. So that's good to get used to. But otherwise, a lot of similarities.
No, that's excellent point you bring out, because I suppose pardon me if I'm oversimplifying, maybe it's consensus based more. People want to know the journey up to the decision and their decision first, and they sort of assume that the consensus has been reached ahead of time, possibly because you don't need to involve the whole town in a meeting, just the CEO and a few folks. Whereas here, I suppose it's a team building. Fantastic contrast. Thank you for that. So I think I'll now go to questions. Now, an interesting thing, Seth, I'm seeing is that there are a lot more product management questions than engineering questions. So I know you can't see this, but this is actually what's happening. So apologies for that. So let's go with the most voted question right now. This is from Ilya. So the question is, at what point should a PM involve an engineering manager, a tech lead, and the rest of the dev team in product decisions?
That's a great question. Look, I think in many cases, the ideal is really that throughout the whole life cycle of product and engineering development, that there's some collaboration that's happening through a whole product team, which means that you're having some collaboration between product managers, engineers, and often designers also. And so what I'm not saying is that the whole team, like all of the engineers, are involved in every step of the process. I'm not saying that, but you know, like as you're starting the process, you need to have someone who is asking questions about what the most valuable thing is. And that tends to be a product representative. Yep. You need to have someone asking about whether it's going to be usable. So that's maybe a designer, often a product, sometimes, you know, like these are not fixed concepts. And then you need to bring in a perspective of the technology, of what's feasible. I mean, this is both about cost and time and also opportunity. And so I really, I've seen the best outcomes when you have that conversation happening pretty early, even in the discovery process, that product managers are including someone from engineering to work with to develop some of the ideas and to have some back and forth. I don't know if there's...
And I like how you brought about the viability, desirability, feasibility angle, because that's our Venn diagram. Only if it's viable, feasible, desirable, should we go build it. So absolutely agree with you there. Let's go to the next question. This one's slightly involved. So it's like a big picture for you. What are the common pitfalls you've seen through the career in communication between engineering and product? Is it always only timeline expectations? Is it anything different?
I mean, okay, so I don't know. There are lots of pitfalls. There's lots of ways to get into trouble, right? Yes. Let's see where to start. I mean, not talking early enough and often enough is a major pitfall. And so, when there's a product conversation that happens and a sort of, okay, well, now we've determined what we need to build, and now we say, okay, engineering team, you go build this. And then, I mean, even right there, like I would question whether we're doing the right thing, because we're not kind of co-creating a vision for what we're building, and we're not bringing the engineers into understanding really in a deeper way, like why they're building that. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so if I had to pick one common pitfall, like that's one of, hey, like product goes and does research on their own, they come up with this great plan. It might really be great, but the engineers are not in the context, and so then they go do it, and then also on the engineering side, they go off and build and don't bring product in to say like this or like that, like this or like that, and they're not talking as they're building. And so then you get to the end, or you think it's the end, and you're actually not done because what's built is not what was wanted, right? So this pitfall.
Excellent. I know you can go on for this, but let's come back to this afterwards, because this is a very loaded question. It brings years and years of experience.
I mean, maybe just to add one other one that I think is maybe a little bit more subtle, and that's sort of taking too big of a bite.
Mm.
It's even when the communication is happening, it's easy to get into a trap where you're trying to build too much at once, and that causes you to take too long to get feedback, and that has a bunch of kind of negative reinforcement loops, and can be hard to realize that's happening until you're kind of further into it, and then you get into what the question asked about in terms of, I mean, that sort of triggers the like timeline and expectations, and we're not done anyway. So
I'll just add two sub questions to that, because this is something I've been thinking about. So the first question is, sometimes I've got the engineering into the equation when I'm still sort of figuring out the dish in the kitchen. The recipe is still not cooked, still not figured out all of that. It's a little more chaotic than I like it, right? Sometimes engineering teams like it, sometimes they don't like it. So is there like a smell test? Is there like a personality test to say what kind of personality does my engineering team have, and should I not, or should I involve them earlier or sooner?
It's a good question. I don't think I have an answer, but I really understand what you're talking about. Like part of being an engineering manager is really about trying to understand the engineers that you work with and what their strengths are, and they're going to be different, and you want them to be different to come together as a team and do great stuff. And some engineers have that knack or talent for kind of thinking product and working with the product team and putting their energy there and enjoy it and get energy from it. And others really don't like that. Like you said, like they're interested in other details, which is fine. We need those too. I don't know how to exactly, I mean, I guess you need to look for that in your org. I think as an organization, you need to kind of think about that when you're hiring too, so that you identify some of those people who are going to help in that way.
Excellent. Just one last tiny bit there. There's a saying that if you use engineers only to code, you're not really using engineers, because coding is not the skill they bring in, it's development. Coding and development are two different things. So how much do you agree with that? And how should a product manager engage with a person like yourself or with your subordinate to involve you in the right way? And an acceptable answer is, some people like it, some people don't like it. But I would say, I also believe in this, because if you have smart people around you, talk to them. Worst case, they might say no, but it's your job to at least offer up the opportunity.
Right.
So what do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, we're not doing really good here on the conflict part of. I don't know if we were supposed to, but I guess I'm gonna kind of agree with you. Look, I think you hit on. I mean, one just obvious and main top line thing, which is you've hired a team of talented problem solvers in terms of your engineers, and so you can involve them and use them. I think great product solutions come. Like that it's not linear. It's not like product idea fully formed and then implement and then done. It's like it's this interplay with the technology to uncover a clever technical solution, to uncover then again a slightly different approach on the product feature. So I think that I like that kind of 60% concept, in that I think there's a real opportunity to use engineers to help them, to have them really understand the problem and bring their problem solving capabilities to bear, which leads to better technical solutions. So it improves that way, but it also can even loop back into the product itself.
Excellent. Well, that's good news to hear, because I always wanted to hear the other side, because I've always offered it up, but I've never got the opportunity to ask the person on the other side and how that feels. So that's good to know. Let's go to the next one now. So the next one comes from Priyanka. In early product development, sometimes the product strategy and vision is not clear. How do you go about bringing clarity and how does one involve tech in that process?
I think I mean, we might mean different things about how early or whatnot. But I think one way of thinking about this is that you want to kind of form your teams, and that might be, I can try and clarify if it's not clear what I mean by that, but kind of based on the stage that you're at or the type of project or work that you're doing. And so so like what has worked well is to have, an engineering leader and a product leader be in charge of some new green, just early, and that engineering leader is kind of signed up for being in the chaos and following along and keeping up and bringing some of the engineering perspective. But you're not then trying to, you don't have a team of 8 engineers trying to follow, or you work really small. You use maybe just one engineering leader, partnering with the product leader, or maybe you have a couple of engineers who you're setting the expectation that what they're there to do is like some quick prototyping and experimentation, and that they're excited to do that.
Fair enough. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you would say that tech should always be given the option to be involved, depending on how busy you are or how occupied you are with the release. You might choose not to, but I think it's the first thing is to, especially when you're trying to do something new and you don't know much, it is better to offer it up to tech engineering team and then seek their opinion.
I mean, look, my inner belief is that you get the best products when you have a team that's more cross-disciplinary, working together from early on. So there's that. Yes, I think it can also work where you have, in some of that very earliest part, you have a product team off, like iterating and exploring and doing some early research and reducing some of the options and getting more clarity before bringing engineering in. Like I'd say at BlaBlaCar, that's more the pattern, and perhaps given some areas of the domain, like it makes sense that we can do it this way. So I see both approaches as can work, and I'm sharing a little bit my especially for really new product part, I feel like that involvement that's where there's the most value.
Excellent. All right. So moving on then, this is a very interesting question. I think you'll like this. So Caroline asks us, what tips do you have for a platform product manager whose customers are the engineers within the company?
Yeah, that's a great role. I'm really excited that. I'm happy to hear that we have a product manager who's got that focus, because I think that product management benefits not just external products but internal ones too, and that mindset is really useful. I think a challenge there is that the platform team that are building the tools is going to identify very closely with their customers, and that's a very double-edged sword. And so helping them to connect with and really understand the challenges that the engineers that are not themselves have is the thing that I think I would make sure you're doing even more of, is that kind of like how can you make sure that the engineers you're working with that are building are understanding the problems of your customers who are other engineers in the company.
And I personally think this is a tricky job because so I was a developer before I became a product manager. And the first thing I realized in the job was, do not solution, stay in the problem space. whereas my previous was only stay in the solution space, don't care about the problem. So this now is saying, so I am a product manager, I'm in the problem space, but the space I'm entering is the solution space for the people that I'm going to be working with. So this is going to be tricky to say, which hat am I wearing right now? Is the solution hat, the problem hat? Have you come across anything like that? Anybody who's done the transition like that? And would you have any thoughts on this topic?
Well, that's a hard jump to make in terms of, it's easy, I think, for us just as humans to fall into the solution space kind of too soon. And I think what makes a great product manager is in part being able to stay longer and more focused on really understanding the problem and not what you think, not just stopping at the first, understanding of the problem.
So you heard it here, folks. Stay in the problem space, product managers. I'm going to write it down on a sticky note and stick it on my wall just to remind myself that. Thank you, Seth. So moving on, we have another question from Abbas. His question is, what has been your approach to work with PMs to balance the product features and technology backlog?
Yeah, this is a central challenge of building software, of managing engineering teams. Let's see. So one thing that I've come to observe is a structural thing, and the pattern that I've over some experience have grown to like the best is one in which teams have an engineering manager that's working closely with the team and is responsible for both the engineers on the team, but also the team's execution and delivery. And I like this because then this person can partner with a product manager, and there's a kind of balance of power that can happen, that can help make sure that some of the engineering or technical considerations get heard. Honestly, I think, well, at least in a couple of my experiences, in this conflict, I think it's often characterized as if, and maybe this would be a good one for you to respond to, Deepak. So the common characterization is like engineers want to fix, the tech debt, what have you, and product people want to deliver features, and the product people are like, no, roadmap, like that's more important, that's higher priority, this, that, and the other, and then the engineers are frustrated. And I mean, I know that that happens, and sometimes it happens for really good reasons. You need to win this customer or move the business forward, or like there's balance and trade-off. What I often see is that the technical work doesn't actually get advocated. It doesn't actually get, like, the engineers don't somehow really bring it forward in a way that the product counterpart can understand the impact on the product as a whole. And so then it doesn't get prioritized. And so coming back to the structural thing, it's much harder to do that if you've got, this PM who has a lot of kind of organizational authority, and then like a tech lead who's, just part of the team or whatever. It's like, it's not balanced, and it's hard to have that conversation. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I was thinking, as you said, coming back to me, this is a hard one. And this, I think, is the $1 million questions for anybody, product or engineering, because technical debt is a reality. New features are a reality. Solving customers is a reality. Staying competitive is a reality. Commoditization, copying, those are all realities. This is a very hard one. So this is one thing we tried. One thing we always tried was, say, you get 10 things to do. 6 are new features, 2 are improvements, and 2 are bugs. And if you don't have 2 bugs, you use the 2 for technical debt. And that's the usual process. And every product manager gets a veto once every quarter to come and veto that and say, I'm using my card now, and now I get to pick my bugs, and you get to use it only once in a year. So you get to choose that really, really well. And it's hard
Yeah,
because who gets to decide whose veto goes first, prioritization. But at least if you know this game, everybody knows the rules of the game and everybody knows what's going to happen.
yeah,
It's transparent, and then it could be a conversation to say, look, man, I know you can use your veto. Of course, we'll go with the customer first, but come on, be reasonable. You used yours upfront. Like, come on, the first thing we do is the first quarter you use it. That doesn't work for us. So that's one thing we've tried. But yeah, this is a hard one. This is a
yeah.
very, very hard one to solve.
You know, the, um, I like how you characterize it. Like, you've got all of these realities, and those are real, and they're in competition, and you're going to struggle, and you're going to get it right some of the time, and not as right other parts of the time. I do encourage teams, though, also to almost kind of try and push away or reject quite that categorization or that thinking or that way of approach. Like, we've got the tech backlog and we've got the product backlog. And as much as possible, or whenever possible, what I want to see teams do is understand the product thing we need to enhance, and then think about how we put that into the system in a way that both implements that feature and leaves the system, in terms of its system and code and tech debt health, in a better state. And so if that means that feature is going to take longer than it might if you did it without doing those things, like, that's okay. But it's a much easier conversation. And here, like, now I'm like giving away my like secret, Deepak, but it tends to be easier negotiation with product if you're saying, like, yeah, you want this new screen flow, great, like, we can do that, and it's going to take 6 weeks. Oh, 6 weeks, like, the last time we did a new screen flow, it only took 2. Well, yes, but like, in order to do it at the quality that is our standard, like, we also have to incorporate some other changes and improvements in order to deliver this and be able to support it. So if you want that feature, it's 6 weeks. And that's a much easier conversation than, okay, well, we can do that feature and it'll take us 2 weeks, but we really need to carve out for a 4-week tech debt sprint. Can we do that? And then all of a sudden, like, you're like, okay, we'll do the feature I want for 2 weeks, but then then it's time to do the 4-week tech debt sprint, and all of a sudden, like, you're like, wait, can you do something else, right?
Yeah. Selective amnesia happens. English doesn't make sense anymore. I'm on vacation. Fun things happen. I've been there. So moving on, we have Roxana with a question. So her question is, where is the boundary between the PM and engineering? And is it okay for a PM to reach out to the engineers directly and have them switch directions rather than talk to the engineering manager?
Almost always, no, don't do that. I guess that one's easy for me. I don't know. Look, there's a lot of context in terms of the collaboration. I've seen a lot of healthy teams where the PM and the engineers directly interact, and it's healthy and it's good, right? So there's like, an engineer is starting to implement something, and then they realize they have a question about the feature or about what the user wants, and they connect with the PM, and then the PM makes a call, and then, right, they go like that, and that sort of thing is great. It's really tough. It's really, I mean, that's an example. Yeah, like, yeah, you like, if you're redirecting the engineers, like, that's really tough. It puts the engineers in a really hard position between kind of who, if we use the marriage analogy, it's sort of like, which parent are they? I'm not sure if I like how this analogy goes, but anyway, it's that sort of like, which parent do you try and please? You're going to have one that's angry and one that you're pleasing. So for engineers, it's really unfair, and it's really hard to manage a team when the goalpost keeps changing, right? So, yeah.
In my couple analogy, my wife always wins. So Nobody needs to know. I mean, that is true, I suppose. So next question is interesting. It builds on suppose like on your experience between America and Europe. So having experience from both sides of the Atlantic, how are the markets different, and what's make life for C-level people of a company one side of the ocean versus the other? So essential question is, how are the markets different, and what is life of a C person, both sides?
Sure. Let's see. Well, some of that I don't know if I've have almost enough data points to give you a great answer, but well, okay. In the U.S., there are things about employment law that are quite different, and I will say that that seems like it's a lot more challenging in France than in the US from a C-level perspective in terms of what options you have, hiring and firing, the timelines, and your ability to kind of restructure your business based on market realities. Here in France and in many parts of Europe, the employment contracts are much different, and so there's a lot longer lead times to hire. So it's very, if you make an offer to someone who is in a position today, you're going to quite likely wait 3 months before they can join. And then similarly on the parting ways, in the US, that's something that can happen very quickly, and here, at least speaking from the experience in France, that's something that plays out over longer periods of time. And there's pros and cons, I guess, on both sides, but I guess that sort of speaks to some differences in how it kind of changes some of the strategy and experience. I don't know how much, I mean, in terms of market, I mean, maybe there's a question there trying to ask about like salary and that sort of thing. Although I guess it kind of depends very much on the type of business you're running and where you're earning revenue, how relevant that really is, right? Like if you're a French company doing a lot of things in this environment, then the fact that the market pays different, like may or may not in the end be that much of a
no, yeah, and I worked in America for about 6 years, so I can attest to that. Hiring is easier, firing is 2 weeks, get the pink slip, you're 2 weeks, you're in, 2 weeks, you're out. It's definitely faster. Here it is much slower, and I suppose from my perspective, I suppose it's there because it's sort of aware that it's going to happen sooner. If you can't get people, you'll contract out. Money is not a problem. You can just spend it and get a contractor in and move on. Here, I suppose it's a lot more, how to say, collaborative. It's a lot more team perspective, and Europe as a culture as a whole, at least from my experience, just been 2 to 3 years here, I do see that. I do see it's longer lead times both ways, coming in, going out, and laws are arranged that way. So that's a good point. So the next question is something I wanted to ask you. So this is very good. So this one says, it's from Yahya. It says, the Agile development framework is providing a way to formalize the relationship between team and engineering. So do you think this framework may not be a proper framework for engineering projects?
Well, so like the short answer is yes. There's not one size fits all framework for all projects, so that's easy. We might, if we're going to go in any depth, we have to kind of back up, because I don't know that Agile development framework, like I think for 6 different people on this call, we could get 6 different definitions about what that actually means. Mm-hmm. And so there's that as well. We have a tendency in the tech industry to look for, kind of magic solutions or processes, and then to build up industries around trying to adopt and learn them, without kind of doing the work to really understand what's at the heart of them, or doing the work to actually identify the aspects that make those processes or tools work. And I think this, I mean, so I can for sure point at the examples around different Agile methodologies and people saying, I mean, like, how many of you here have been on a team that says, for example, we're doing Scrum, but then how many people have like read a Scrum book, or if you just look at like what some documentation of Scrum is, like how close are you to it? And you know, 9 times out of 10, you get the teams that are like, yeah, Scrum is this thing, and like we do that, well, except for this and this other thing and this other thing that we don't do. And then you're like, okay, I mean, anyway.
So it's a good point to make. And these are, I must say, to the audience, these are very good questions. I see Seth having to think a lot, I think, and these are also very experiential questions. These are questions you have to deal with every day. So these come from your answer, Seth. I really appreciate the depth you're providing here and your hesitation, because, yeah, there are so many ways to answer this. There's not like one-stop shop solution to this. So I appreciate that. One related question I've always had. So I've come from a time when waterfall was a thing to a time when Agile is a thing. I come from a time when HLD, LLD is a thing. I've been a developer writing HLD, LLD. I was like, why? Let me just write the dev code and move on. Why do I need to do all that? To a point where this now. So how have you? And one favorite feedback I get now is, well, what's an epic? What's a story? What's a task? How much should be an epic? How much should be a story? How much is a task? So how do you see that? How do you see the two worlds colliding, the waterfall world, the Agile world? Have you got into these conversations about that's not an epic, it's not sized correctly?
I mean, well, yeah, have I gotten into those conversations? Yes, yes, I have. Okay, you know, one point is that the projects, there are different types of projects, and at different points in their life cycle, I guess, right, or in their evolution. And so when you're doing something new and very innovative, or you're trying to figure out, where there's a lot of uncertainty about even what the goal is or what you're trying to do, like a lot of the Agile methodologies that help you react and iterate or lean, like this stuff is really appropriate. On the other hand, where you have a mature and established product where stability, you know, where the goals are like optimizations and cost reductions, and like the tools and the flow and the patterns around that kind of project are going to be, but they probably should be different, right? Your goal is not super tight iterations around that. You need to identify, you know, what the opportunities are, and you may need some much longer cycles to make an improvement because you have this established project and so on. So I think there's that distinction. And now I think maybe I've lost track of, I feel like I didn't quite answer your question. I went off.
You did. So the other question was, how does one get the, is this an epic? Is this a story? How does one get that question? How does one answer that right?
Look, it really helps teams execute when the way that they represent and talk about and organize their work is shaped around delivering an actual slice of value to customers or users. Mm-hmm. For sure, it's too small when you have a team that is entirely focused on tasks, because tasks are tasks could be fine, but tasks are just not the thing. Mm. You can do tasks all day for days and days, and what have you actually delivered? What value have you shipped? So it's too small if you can't talk about value. Now, there's lots of ways of getting too big, because on the other end of that is a really big batch size and long lead time and all of that. And so at some level, I think the trick is to go as thin and small as you can that captures some user value. And then that's the thing to focus the conversation around.
One thing is I've always liked is to always tell myself outcomes are far more important than outputs. And every month, I sort of write to myself to say, man, have you thought about outcomes? Have you thought about outputs? And try and match that. And even sometimes be transparent with the engineering team to say, look, man, I'm struggling here. Because I've been able to maintain that discipline very well. This sprint or a couple of sprints from now, that's harder. Just spitball with me. You don't need to answer. Just stay in the room with me and play devil's advocate. That's helped out. But again, it takes a lot of trust because you don't want to come across as I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, but at the same time seeking genuine help to say, hey, this one is tricky. This one is tricky.
Yeah.
Lovely. So next question is kind of interesting one. This is from Gilberto. So the question is, any tips or resources on how to manage sideways? I don't understand sideways. Maybe it's dotted lines is what they mean.
Well, here's how I think I understand sideways. And so, I mean, you've got, managing down typically is your directs, or you're part of the organization, and managing up is to your manager and their team, and sideways is peers in other parts of the organization. So I don't know if there's some way for to send us a message whether we got that part right, but I guess maybe I'll try and answer that from an engineering perspective. Maybe it doesn't matter, and it's this: spend some time being curious about the goals and understanding the goals and objectives of who you're working with, and try and dig into that and ask them about those things, and make sure you understand what matters to them, what they're trying to accomplish, or what their part of the org is trying to accomplish or is tasked with. You can ask about what's hard or challenging. Those are good questions to understand, because you can. I mean, one, it's a good way to build some trust. You may be able to help, and that may help build a relationship that makes collaboration easier.
Excellent point. Next one is from Yahya again. So this question is to say, of course, what do you think of the idea that you have the engineering team engage with customers once a year and learn about their experiences?
I'm a fan. That's something we did some at Chef, and I think it had really, really good results to help build an empathy for our customers. I think it was especially helpful at Chef, and it could help in the product manager who was asking about platform teams. Like, this kind of go embed and be with your customer is a good, especially if you're internal, it's inexpensive to do, at least compared to actually leaving the building. So I think there's a lot of value in that. At BlaBlaCar, we encourage all of the employees to use the service and to try it out, and have kind of an arrangement you can get paid for a day to go carpooling around. And I think that bringing some of that experiential perspective is pretty high value and worth some time.
That's a very interesting question, because I was going to ask you that maybe with Chef you might have had it easier because you are in essence some way, shape, or form a little closer to your end customer because it's enterprise. With BlaBlaCar, it's pulls apart because yes, you can use the app, but how can I be a mom of two? How can I be a 60-year-old woman going around? Because those are very, very hard problems to solve. That's where the research team comes into play. The personas you create, those come into play. So that's a very good point.
It's not a replacement of doing the work. It's not a replacement of user research or a product team or any of that. But it's a way of deepening the understanding of the engineers of what's at stake and sparking ideas and all of those things. I think it's valuable.
Right. So I think we may have time for one more for you, Seth. So this is from Nitsan. So to follow up on the question, how do you manage expectations, about timeline, and how do you manage tensions around that?
Yeah. I think you find ways to break down the problem and to deliver smaller pieces on a regular basis. So that's one go-to strategy when that stuff starts getting really tense. I mean, that may or may not be the conversation that you have, but if that's the action that you take with your team, is to find a way to break it down and deliver something that moves things forward. So again, it's not just delivering anything, it's delivering something that everyone can acknowledge adds value or moves you closer, and then you keep doing that. So that's one answer in terms of a tactic. I mean, the other is really just about digging into understanding what's the actual issue, like what's driving that timeline. And so then it can get tense, but at the end of the day, there's not really that we can talk about scope, we can talk about the timeline. Sometimes we can talk about how many or who's working on what, but that only goes so far. We can sometimes talk about quality, but again, there's not a whole lot of leverage there, because building low quality stuff just is very rarely a solution for anyone. And so bring it back to those things, and try and invite someone into a partnership kind of conversation of okay, well, here are the realities we have. Because we can't hit this date with this scope. Cool. That's a bummer, but it's where we are today. So what are we going to do? And let's move forward.
And coming back to the couple things I started off with, it takes a lot of trust to be able to say that, and because nobody wants to hear release is not going to go out or feature is not going to go out. It comes back to trust in empathy and understanding. Hey man, I hear you, I see you, I feel you, but there are these realities, and it does come to that. So sincerely appreciate you taking the time, Seth. And Plato, again, thank you for the opportunity to hear from Seth. This is a fantastic conversation. I learned quite a bit. Hopefully the audience also learned quite a bit. And again, I look forward to mentoring. I am a mentor on Plato HQ, so is Seth and Mustafa said. Lots of people like us who are happy to help other people along the way. This is a great conversation, Seth. Thank you very much. I don't know how to say thank you in French.
Merci.
Merci. Merci.